And then what I do is I download the MP4 of the conversation, and then I'm going to put that through Audacity and edit it and make it actually something better.
Great.
So that's how the podcast works. And while I like the idea of wanting to work on an idea of co-hosting with you, let's brainstorm ideas. For today, I want to be your guest of my show.
Yeah.
And let's keep it that way for
Great.
now. But
Perfect.
I definitely want to think about that because, man, just someone to keep bouncing ideas off is good. But I do want to see just how it goes so far, see if we work together and all that.
Perfect.
All right. I'm still working on a title, but currently my podcast title is Games and Education. So we'll go with that. And I'm going to start, and when we'll just go from there. And I look forward to hearing everything.
Great.
So here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Games and Education. I am your host, Keenan Kibrick, and I'm here today with Joshua Archer of the Game Academy. Before we even go on, care to explain just quickly what the Game Academy is, Josh, and say hello?
Sure. Hello, everybody. The Game Academy is a educational nonprofit. We established ourselves in 2016, and our main purpose is to further the emotional, social, and academic success of children and lifelong learners, to tell you the truth, through the use of tabletop role-playing games and LARPs.
And on this, and I also will say this, I actually do work some with the Game Academy. I am one of their what's the title? It's
Part of the advisory committee.
Yes, part of the advisory committee. Thank you. And I help give advice to them. So I do want to just say that right there. But they are an amazing community. And Josh is here to really talk about what this is and what all this idea is and how we can get other people to maybe want to start their own communities like this themselves. So, Josh, I guess the beginning is you've said the Game Academy is a place for students to go to run games and play them. How did you get this idea in the first place? What help you? How'd you make this in the first place?
Right. Well, I think that, like most things, this starts with a personal narrative. And for me, I started playing role-playing games back in, oh boy, in the 70s when I was in second grade. I found a group of kids that were during recess up against the wall, rolling dice, talking, having a great time. I was wondering what was going on. I was not a very athletic kid, so during PE, I usually would hang out in the field or away from everybody. This looked like an activity that I was like, what are you doing? And oh, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, well, what's that? And like, why don't you just sit down and take a character sheet and we'll explain it. And within, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, I was rolling. And ever since then, I have been involved with this activity from a not an education, but a entertainment point of view. But I did notice in looking at my narrative, looking back, this had a huge effect on my development. I'd say that before I started playing role-playing games, I was a relatively shy kid. I was not very good with speaking to others or in any way articulate. And having the practice of sitting down with a group of people and telling a story together over what turned out to be years, gave me a lot of practice, both with the socialization aspect and with telling a narrative, and also being oriented towards certain academic subjects such as mythology or history that maybe I didn't have a reason to be involved with without having an activity that I cared about and I enjoyed. And it followed me up through my entire educational career. But one doesn't usually take their hobbies and say, well, how do I make my life out of this? I had a normal career going into software development. I was an engineer for 14 years or so, and became disillusioned with the constant working for somebody else on somebody else's dreams, and tried a few companies myself, ran a web design business. Finally, just realized I needed a huge change, something new, something that really fit my soul. It was authentic. And I looked at my life and saw the two constants were role-playing games and education. I've always been involved with education, either as somebody involved from the learning aspect, or I've taught classes in adult school. I've taught classes, substitute teaching in high school, and I knew that there was untapped potential especially for reaching kids who didn't have motivation in a traditional setting. School, the game that we call education, the game that we call school, fits by definition about 10 to 20% of the population, those that are getting A's and B's. Everything below that, you start to see a drop off of engagement. But I knew that we are storytelling creatures. We define ourselves through story. I mean, our entire life is made up of trying to create the best narrative that describes us and portrays us to others as we can. And sometimes we don't have a lot of choice with what life serves us up and where our narrative ends up. But with role-playing games, with collaborative storytelling is actually how I prefer to refer to it, we get to right off the bat define ourselves and cast ourselves in the light that we wish, and take some chances in an environment that has low a low consequence factor for the types of risks we might want to take. So I thought this is a great playground for kids and adults, really, but in my case, we're working with K through 12. A chance to really practice telling stories that allow us to explore parts of our personality that maybe we don't get a chance to in our everyday. And through that, exploring subject matter as well that we don't necessarily run into in our everyday. If we are, playing a science fiction story and we're the engineer of a starship, we are bumping up against subatomic physics. We're bumping up against theoretical physics. These things you can scaffold as you go. If you're not really interested in that, you're probably not the kid who's playing the engineer. You're probably playing the captain or the one of the away team officers. But if you're playing the engineer, you've probably got something inside of you that likes science, that likes the concepts, and so you get to explore those concepts. And if you become interested, you find yourself reading books about it outside of the game just so you can play the game better. But you're also learning about those topics. So that happens, no matter what the setting is, there's something that the kids that are playing are going to grab hold of and get motivated around. So, and we've been running since, as I said, we were established in 2016. Before that, I actually ran a business with a partner called Yokari Games, which was a for-profit version of what we're doing, for about 4 years. And so I've been at this about 6 or 7 years, and we've had kids in the program that have come up, from 10 years old. Now some of them are 17, 18 years old, and we're seeing their the growth that they've gone through, the capacities that they've developed, both socially and academically, are really inspiring. So I know I'm in the right business. I know what we're doing has real effect, and it's exciting to be able to do this, and to have many people participating. We're growing 50% in a year in our population over the last few years. This next year, I think we may more than double with some partnerships that we're exploring with Lycée Français in San Francisco and Sausalito. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but our goal is to expand into a national and then hopefully an international arena, and helping others establish chapters of what we're doing right here in the Bay Area.
There's so much there. That's so amazing. I love that story. I actually want to know one thing first, because you say K-12. What are some of the youngest? Because I've been trying to work with classes. I'm now moving into working more with elementary next year. Mm-hmm. What are the younger grades that you've actually been able to do the Game Academy with? How young have you seen role players? I mean, I have a daughter who's 6, right, and she can play a little bit of role playing. Mm-hmm. But what do you notice with games? What is a good age to start role playing games with? Or is it for everyone?
Right. Well, first off, let's handle that last question first. I don't know if it's for everyone. I mean, I think that everyone tells and likes to hear stories. That's for certain. That's part of what we do in our living of our lives. But to pretend to be someone else and to work from that point of view comes easier for some than to others. It comes easier to children of younger ages than it does to kids that are a little bit older. So we traditionally in our program, we say K through 12, but we tend to take kids around 9 or 10. So about second, third, fourth grade is when we start them in the program, mostly because when you're talking about role playing games, there's the play and then there's the game. And the game part is understanding systems, abstracting what you want your character to do into a set of rules that determine, whether or not you're successful. And younger kids, this is a little bit of a harder concept to hold on to. So I would say for the most part, if your children are role playing, if they are on the playground or in the classroom or at home playing with doll houses, talking from the perspectives of their dolls, or telling stories where they're the heroes of the story. I see this. I mean, I wouldn't say it's universal, but it's something that I think kids do more readily. Then they're already doing role play. And if you want to coach them towards more structured role play, you can introduce little elements that add kind of a random factor so that it's not just, I want to do this, I do it. It's more, I want to do this, let's see if I can do it. And I think that the rule system is what helps persistent role play continue in groups. If you watch kids on the playground, younger kids, you'll see them playing superheroes or army men or whatever it is, and they usually declare their own powers and their own. I got this power. I can shoot lasers out of my eyes. Like, well, I have a shield that reflects your lasers off of my shield. Like, well, my lasers are more powerful than your shield, so they cut right through. And eventually that negotiation breaks down where they're like, well, I quit because this is just like us going back and forth about who's more powerful. But if you have some externalized system that says, okay, well, you try to do that, let's see if you're successful, then there's this arbitration that happens that can keep people in the game if everybody agrees to that set of rules. And so I think that's the benefit that you get from using role-playing game systems, is that it helps adjudicate the desires that people have for the narrative they want to push so that those can happen in the same space, right? So I'd say our success rate is, second, third grade is when kids start to have the focus for this, but we work with kids that are younger, usually just with very loose role play with little elements of adjudication, maybe Rochambeau, or maybe a six-sider, or flipping a coin, or card decks, or things like that can add elements. And it's fun, and there's some surprise elements there, so the kids can get excited about results. It also teaches them how to handle failure. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems we have in our educational system at large, is that everything seems to be higher and higher stakes. I mean, you fail a test, you get a low grade, your grade in the class goes down, then your chances for getting into college gets, I mean, the narrative is a common narrative, we know. But being able to pick yourself up after a mistake or a failure is an essential part of living, and it happens in professional life all the time. If you're not making mistakes, you're probably not learning. And so having the chance to teach kids that a failure, quote unquote, is really just opening up of a new vista of opportunities, new decisions to be made, allows them to take more chances and to not have a risk averse attitude develop. So I kind of drifted off the direction of your question, but I think the main point is that the younger that you work, the less structure you can introduce. But the less worried you have to be, because I think kids, as I said, are already doing role play naturally when they're young. It's usually when they're being told by their peers or by their teachers or their environment that you need to stop playing, that's when the danger happens, that they may not hold on to the ability to tell these narrative stories.
That's so much great. I don't even care if I'm off on tangent. That is exactly the type of stuff I wanted to learn about. You're right. Failure is one of the best things about role playing games. They learn to do that. Even my daughter, I never really thought of it that much, but we play a game. Have you ever heard of the Siblings Trouble?
No.
It's actually, I really encourage this for anybody who has young children and wants to get into role playing games. It's a card game, but it's basically a role playing game with cards where you go to encounters and roll 1d6 and use little items for it. And it's all based on like the art is very 8-year-old centric or 7-year-old centric. And
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love the game playing with my daughter because you're right. The failure part I notice all the time in this game. When she gets something wrong, she doesn't care that much. She just thinks of another idea, or she knows in the game she can ask for help when they fail.
Right.
And that's also such a great cooperative thing, because I want to talk about that for a sec. When we talk about all these different things with students, and I heard this from Ben Robbins, I want to talk about you. Everybody's mentioning collaboration. That seems like one of the biggest aspects of this that I really want to hear more about why that is so important. Because, you know, if you talk to people who don't
Mm-hmm.
play games, they probably think most of this is a creative aspect because you're creating a world or you're creating this. But it really sounds like to everybody, the creation is less important than learning how to collaborate and work with others. In your
Right.
academy right there, what have you noticed about people learning and growing with collaboration with it? Are they becoming more collaborative and
Mm-hmm.
working better together by playing games? Have you noticed that that is a common thing that occurs? And how do you help foster that even more?
Right, right. Yes, I do have to say, I mean, um, collaboration is one of the main aspects, one of the main features of role-playing games. And it differs from normal games, like board games that tend to be the opposite of collaborative or competitive, where you have a winner and you have a loser. And so much of academics is kind of oriented in this way too. I know that classrooms try to introduce group projects, but it's really the sort of exception to the rule. In reality, we're all playing a game where we're taking tests and learning facts and doing projects and competing against each other for the highest grade in the class. And that sets up an aspect of distrust, holding your cards close to your chest, not sharing, which ends up being problematic in the workplace. We don't do business as cowboys, shooting one another for the highest rank on the scoreboard. In fact, when I was in software engineering, one of the biggest problems that we would have were the really hotshot programmers that couldn't work with other people. That it was almost worse to have one of these people on your team than it was to have people less skilled but more able to work together. So kids do come into the program with a competitive aspect already built into them from be it their schooling or the environment that we're growing up in our society, and we they learn very quickly, and we help them, we scaffold them through this process. We see it manifests with a Me Too type of aspect, for one thing. Like if there's a test that one of the characters, like, so we'll back up. In a role-playing game, in a collaborative role-playing game, it's an ensemble cast, so it's less like Jason and the Argonauts and more like Scooby-Doo, where every character has their own particular strengths and their own particular weaknesses. And so when you run into certain types of tests, I mean, let's take a fantasy role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons for an example, and you might have a fighter, you have a thief, you have a magic user, and you have a cleric, and each one of them has their own particular things they do well. And if you are in a group and you've got the kids, uh, and there's this a mechanical trap, and it's got whirring blades and gears, and the person who's best suited to fix this problem is the thief or the rogue. And one of the kids might say, okay, I'm the rogue, I want to diffuse this trap. I'm gonna break it so we can get past it. And then the fighter says, oh, I want to do that too. Oh, I want to be part of this scene. I want to be in that scene. And then the wizard says, I want to do that too. And so you end up with a Me Too attitude where every test, every single kid needs to step up to the plate and be part of that test. And we teach them to look at their own specialties and to look at the specialties of the people in their group, and to realize that if you are not very good at doing this, you can cause the problem to get worse. But if you rely on the member of your team who is good at this particular kind of test, then we all benefit and we all move forward without getting danger, without being hit by whirling blades or blasts of fire, things like that. So it's a lesson that takes a little while to learn, but they do understand it, and they start to understand, oh, this is a scene that my character is good at. And we teach them that if you're holding that space for other people, they hold it for you. That you have confidence that your scene is coming, and that we also can scaffold this or mitigate it by something that we call character advice. We allow for other players at the table to raise their hand, and if the person who's acting in the scene at that moment wishes, they can accept the player advice. The person can just say, well, I think that you might want to do it this way, or you might want to, try this particular angle. And then it is up to the player then to either accept that advice or to not use that advice. And the person who gives the advice has to be okay with that. So it builds in a way to give constructive criticism, but allow the agency to stay in the hands of the person who's seen it really is. And so um, I think that this type of practice allows people to develop an understanding of team dynamics, and to understand and value the strengths of others, and to realize, like, I don't need to be good at everything. I just need to be good at what I'm good at, and I should know what my team is good at as well.
I love that so much. I can't even. I'm almost speechless at that. I need to use that more with games with children. I haven't thought of the. I mean, it's so funny. In every role playing game, they talk about it, but it kind of always gets pushed to the side a little bit. The when someone's in a scene, you need to let them and embrace it. But I love the suggestion advice to teaching that to students as making it part of it. That is such a great idea. Wow.
Hmm.
With that, though, I do want to go to something else too about games that I'm very curious about. Um, in traditional role playing games like a Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of other games, you have a game master, somebody who's running it to adjudicate rules. And I know I've worked so much with classrooms to try to escape having that game master some, because I find that a very hard task for some students to handle. And I'm curious with younger
Hmm.
students, uh, do you do games without game masters, or how do you teach students to be them? How do you teach students to be okay with one other student adjudicating the rules? Because I know that was my most frustrating thing growing up with role-playing games, is either saying the GM's being unfair or being an unfair GM. And it took a very long time for me to become a kind of great storyteller that is there for the players but also wants to give them challenges. um,
Hmm.
and since this is so big in so many games, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on it? Do you do games with game masters and young children? And if so, how do you do it? How do you handle it? What's your strategy? Because the game master is so integral to so many games. I just want to know how that storyteller aspect goes in. Or do you do what I try to do, is find as many games without a storyteller, because that's the only way I can think of handle it sometimes.
Right, right. So the games that we play are almost exclusively with a storyteller or a narrator role, a facilitator of the story. And for the most part, it is the volunteers and employees of the Game Academy that play that role. But we also do uh, train and give opportunities for kids that have been in the program a bit to take their hand at being the game master, because we think it's an important aspect of understanding how this activity happens. To be given the power of the facilitator is a heady thing, and it can be abused. And we try to model in our own game mastering of the games a certain amount of flexibility and empowerment of the players. So um, we do my in no case do we consider ourselves to be better than or more superior than our players. If a player has an idea that really would like to push forward, we might bend where we were going in order to let that happen. Certain game systems have this as a mechanic in them, such as the Fate system. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it has an element in it called fate points, and fate points can be spent to make certain facts true. They can establish certain things in the world.
I want to. Okay, so I'm gonna. Could you repeat that again? The broadcast cut out right then.
Sure.
So just in case, I want you to say that line again so we can just edit it out.
Sure. So one of the game systems that we use is Fate, and it is a game system that has elements that allow players themselves to have more control over the story narrative than traditionally they might have in another game system. It has something called fate points, and players collect fate points through their good role play or their activities, and then can spend those fate points in many different ways. They can increase their character's capabilities, but more often they can take those fate points and establish facts in the world, so that part of the narrative, if their character needs to have some tool that they don't have on their character sheet, they can spend a fate point and say, well, actually, I have this in my pack. Or they could say, for a fate point, I happen to have a contact in the underworld.
I'm sorry about this. It is breaking up again in this whole conversation of fate, and I want to hear it.
Sure.
I don't know what's causing it. Am I breaking up to you, or do I sound okay?
You sound okay. So let me see. I'm going to change out my mic and see if I can get it to behave better. I've got a standalone mic that might be a higher quality. This headset might be starting to degrade. Let me see here. Now for this.
Check 1 2. Is that any better?
It's a loud mic, but it works.
Is it too loud? I can turn it down.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Start the fate conversation over again. Let's see if that is. I want to hear everything you just said again for a third time. I'm sorry.
Sure. No,
yeah. Start reading of fate what it is, because it sounds so good. So.
Sure.
Go.
So one of the game systems that we use that has elements in it that allows players to have a little bit more agency and can fight some of the problems that you might have with game masters having too much power is called Fate. And the Fate system has a mechanism in it called fate points, which players collect through good role play or through discovery, through achievement. And they can use those in many different capacities. They can use them to increase their character's capabilities, but more often than not, they can use those fate points to establish facts in the world, in the narrative that you're co-creating with the game master. So they can use a fate point to say, I have this tool in my backpack that's necessary to solve this problem, when maybe it wasn't written down on a character sheet. Or I can spend a fate point and say, I've got contacts in this underworld establishment that we're trying to infiltrate, and they are able to make the connection for us that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And so you end up with a negotiation between the game master and the player through the use of these fate points. Other game systems have mechanisms similar to this. Monte Cook Games has the Cypher system, and they have their character points can be used in the same way. And it kind of blurs the edge between game master and player, so that you are teaching the players that the game master is not always 100% in control. In games where it's more structurally that the narrator has more absolute power, we still rely on reference to game rules and give an externalized view of arbitration, so that when we finally give the opportunity for kids in the program, maybe they've been in 2 or 3 years, to try their hand at game mastering, they don't have a model given by us of an autocrat. It's not, haha, I'm now the king of the game, and you're going to have to do as I say, otherwise your character dies. It's really about how do we negotiate together so that we're all having a good time, and that to understand that the narrator or the game master's primary role is to hold space for all the players.
So it's still doing it. I'm so sorry. I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Sure.
Stay there. I'm going to restart it and see if we can get it fixed. Okay. So.
Sure, no problem.
I'll be right back.
Uh-huh.